Hello, everyone. I am going to be going through the humanism slides today. I actually just lost my screen a second ago. Have I found? Oh, there it is. Um, so these slides are going to be about the humanistic approach. One of the weirdest, although with psychodynamic, it's never going to be the weirdest. Um, there's a lot to this, as there are all the approaches. There is a lot to this approach, right? So if we have a look at the screen now, this is pretty much everything that we are going to be looking at in this video. Free will applied to humanism, self-actualization, the hierarchy of needs, the three selves, congruence, what happens if you don't have congruence, conditions of worth, humanism, counselling, humanism. So there's a lot that we are going to be covering, and it's a little bit like psychodynamic in the sense of humanism isn't just one thing. It doesn't say our behavior is caused by one thing. It's basically an amalgamation of loads of different ideas under one umbrella. So the basic tenets of humanism, is that um, there is no one thing that causes your behavior, right? It's a very holistic approach, and it's probably time that we actually maybe start because I'm banging on a bit. So to understand humanism, you need to understand where humanism came from. Humanism, and this is a good A1, humanism is sometimes referred to as the third force of psychology because it was the third major approach that kind of came up. We know all these approaches nowadays, but humanism was the third force, the third one that came up. So the first two were behaviorism and psychoanalysis. So you're talking about B.F. Skinner, Pavlov, Freud, Jung, for example. All of these people were very early psychology. But then in the 1950s, mainly 1960s, humanism started to take root. And humanism was intended to take a less deterministic and more positive point. And again, all of this is good A1. More of a positive stance on human behavior. You know, um, behaviorism, psychodynamic, they were looking at, when behavior is bad, when people are ill, when people fail. And it was quite negative, and psychology was becoming a bit of a negative discipline until humanism come along and said, what, how can we make people great, instead of looking at it the other way around. I'm not going to talk about Gestalt psychology because you don't need to know it here. That's like uni level stuff. I hate Gestalt psychology anyway. But if you have a look at some of these ideas about humanistic theories, it's concerned with human experiences, and that everyone's unique, right? That everyone has freedom to make any choice they make. So a lot of these ideas are things that we have not come across before. So let's start with Carl Rogers just here. 85 years, not a bad innings. But he basically created humanism. He is the Freud of humanism. And he moved, and this is quite important for later on as well, he moved therapy in particular away from psychoanalysis, subjective, and he put the client in the middle of their own therapy. And he was the first person to do that. And most of what you now know as counselling kind of comes from Carl Rogers. So the practical applications, the pioneering work that Carl Rogers did was really quite phenomenal. And basically, and again, this is pretty crucial to the counselling part, our college counsellor is a humanistic counsellor. She's not CBT. She doesn't get you to lie on a chaise lounge and talk about how did your mum treat you, etc., etc. She's a humanistic counselor. She puts you as the student in the centre, and she believes that you have every tool you need in order to fix whatever problem you're going through. And that's an incredibly humanistic idea. So make sure you get that down. That client-centered therapy, which is also known as humanistic therapy, truly believes that every client already has the tools they need to fix the problem. Now, I believe every student can get an A star. I truly do believe that at the start of the 2 years, I do think every student can get an A star. Some people have to work harder because they're coming from further behind, but whatever. I believe that all students have the ability to get an A star. They have the tools, and that no one has like a ceiling. Again, that's a very humanistic idea. That's a very, very humanistic idea that maybe not all teachers believe. So if you have a look at some of the key ideas, this is in your workbook. Now, the workbook does actually follow these slides, not in chronological order, but it does have what's in these slides is basically everything that's in the workbook. So you need to know about this idea about self-actualization. You need to know about what self-actualization is, and it is at its most core. Self-actualization is the concept that self-actualization is the stage or the state where you have filled your whole potential and you have no need for anything. This is, and write this down, an incredibly rare event. It probably does not happen to many, if any, people. It's meant to be this like brief, euphoric moment where you feel at peace, you feel content. Religion calls this enlightenment. Psychology calls this self-actualization. So it's this state that we are all currently aiming for. Now, in order to reach that stage, you need to have unconditional positive regard, which is what I'm going to come to later on. But essentially, unconditional positive regard is someone who looks at you in a positive light, no matter what happens to you. And just ask yourself, just before we get to this, do you have that person in your life? Maybe, maybe not. Everyone here who's watching this wants to grow, wants to learn, wants to be good at what they do. Nobody, those of you who are struggling at college, you don't want to struggle at college. You want to grow, you want to learn, you want to get A's. Nobody here is going, damn, I got a B, I'm aiming for a D grade, bastard. Nobody here is doing that. So this theory believes that everyone is good. Everyone is good. If people are bad, it's because something is forcing them to be bad. It's an obstacle that's diverting them from being good. And if you fix the obstacle, they will become good. I don't think many people believe that Hitler was born evil, right? I'm not saying Hitler's a good person, by the way. Please don't mistake me. But, something is, in this case, it's the Treaty of Versailles. That's one for you history geeks. And the treatment of Germany after the war, that's causing him to be a legitimately certified bad person. So the whole person, and this is really key to humanism, the whole person needs to be studied. I can't just take you and apply what you like out to everybody. The whole person needs to be studied in their environmental context, and therefore this kind of takes this suggests an ideographic approach rather than a nomothetic approach. Now, what that means is you are unique. There is no one else like you, and therefore I cannot take any findings that I find from you and apply them out to anybody, right? That would be a nomothetic approach, and that's, according to this approach, really, really inappropriate because you are your own unique little sunflower, snowflake fingerprint. You're an incredibly unique person. I don't think sunflowers are unique, actually. I don't think that one works. So, more key ideas. I know there are some people in my class who think they are an island, that think that they don't need love, they don't need affection, that they don't need anybody. They're what I would consider myself to be as emotionally broken. So this approach negates that basically and says that humans have a basic need to feel valued. Everyone, especially teenagers, needs validation in their life. They need to be loved. They need to be nurtured. And most people get this from their parents. Not all people, by the way. Not all students get this from their parents. So you may disagree with that, but and I do actually believe this. I do believe that everybody needs to feel valued by people. Now, if this value is given without condition, I've just realised that is going over that thingy. Then you're going to be very healthy. If your parents give you unconditional positive regard, which is basically, and I'll define this again, a dynamic in which people will love you no matter what you do. Let me ask you, do you feel as if your parents or step-parents or guardians, do you feel as if they love you no matter what. You could do the worst thing. Do you think they would like be annoyed at you? Let's say, for example, you attacked someone. That's not the worst thing, but let's say you attack someone unprovoked. They can be annoyed at you. They can be annoyed at you, but would they still love you as a result? So if we have that unconditional positive regard, we're going to grow up to be relatively healthy people. If we don't, if we are criticized by parents, blamed for things, we're going to develop low self-esteem. So that value is really, really important here. Now, I'm supposed to give you unconditional positive regard. I'm supposed to, maybe not if I teach you, that'd be a bit weird, but your teachers are supposed to give you unconditional positive regard. I personally like to think that I do have unconditional positive regard. A student can come up to me and I can't think of any situation in which I'm going to look at them in an inherently bad light. Students piss me off sometimes. Students make bad decisions sometimes. Students do stupid things sometimes. But that doesn't actually change my opinion about them necessarily. So, sorry, my neighbour's just walking around. Yeah, that's a bit weird. Anyway, so let's go into some few bits. I'm going to go through these relatively quickly. These are in your workbook, so if you want to pause the video, have a look through them, do so. Free will is basically the ability to make our own decisions and be in complete control of our behavior, and also be able to resist the influence of the environment and our biology. Right, so free will is that would be a pretty good definition to be able to use. The problem with free will, by the way, it is incredibly difficult to prove or disprove. You cannot prove or disprove what you cannot see, and we cannot see free will. Everyone is unique, just like snowflakes, so therefore there's no point using nomothetic laws. And people should be viewed holistically. So we should see people as like a whole, right? As in like a hole with a W, not like a hole, isn't it? Yeah. And finally, humanism doesn't like science. This isn't in the. I don't think this is in the workbook actually. Humanism does not think, and use this example. Humanism does not think that we can study all human behavior objectively, scientifically. For example, relationships. I cannot follow you around with a clipboard. I cannot, like if you're in a relationship, I cannot do an experiment if you're in a relationship. I have to sit down and I have to interview you, for example. I have to do a questionnaire, things that are quite frankly not scientific. I have to get your opinion. So that's quite an important bit about humanism. It's really kind of the only one, apart from maybe psychodynamic, it's really the only one that kind of follows this path. Okay, self-actualization. We looked at this. This is the only thing we haven't really looked at. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Right, very happy chap, Maslow. Look at him. You just want to hug him. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is this. It says that you start off down the bottom and these are your most pressing needs. There are a few more things here. I think actually I might just see if I can skip to the top. So this one is slightly better, just here down the bottom. So these are your physiological needs are your most pressing. Now you can't climb into the second level just here unless you have done all of these. So you need to learn how to breathe. Well done. But hold on, it's not just breathing. What happens if you've got serious asthma, right? And what happens if you've got a collapsed lung? What happens if you don't have a stable source of breathing? Then you're going to be stuck down here because breathing's a pretty important need, right? And until you have completed all of these needs, so excretion is going for a poo. Now, and you will slowly climb up. Now, personally, I would say I personally think I'm actually up here, right? I think I've got generally I've got my shit together, right? But my toilet broke A few years ago, I didn't break it. That would be a proud achievement. But my toilet broke a few years ago. It started leaking, and I couldn't go for it. Couldn't go to the toilet. Basically, you would not believe, and it was my only toilet in the flat that I lived at the time. You would not believe how much my life then revolved about when I needed to go to the toilet. I was going to the gym in the evenings just to go for a poo. I was trying to squeeze everything out before I was leaving work to go back home. Right, all of a sudden, all my attention is down here. The point I'm trying to make is that if you're like up here, for example, and then something down here goes, you fall down. You fall back down to that level. So you've got physiological needs. Once you've achieved all your physiological needs, and to be honest, in the Western world, our physiological needs are generally well met, right? Unless you get ill, they're generally well met. You go up to safety. So none of you will be above this because you do not have safety or security of home. Your parents could sell the house from underneath your feet and you would have no say in it whatsoever. So at the moment, as students, you don't have it. But let's have a look at that. Do you have security of body? Not really. Not really. Most teenagers, hell, most people don't have security of body. Right, most people are not comfortable in their own skin. It does get easier as you get older. Do you have security of employment? Maybe, maybe. Do you have security of resources? Not many resources. No offense, most of you are poor. Security of morality? No, no. Students are not exactly known to be the most moral of people. Security of health, most of you do. Security, probably not. Look up here, love and belonging. So this up here is quite difficult, I think. This one's a difficult one to achieve. I'm not being funny. We could go out and we could achieve all these today. Right, admittedly that would be a bit of a weird one, but we could go out and we could achieve these today. But you can't go out and achieve these. The higher up you go, the harder it is to achieve. Deep, meaningful friendship is built over a lifetime. Family, sexual intimacy, for example, these are not just things you can go out and achieve. They take time, they take luck, they take effort. As you go further, self-esteem, confidence, achievements, don't take this the wrong way, but most students haven't actually achieved that much because you've been on the same tracks your whole life. You've never had a chance to be able to go off and do something different than your peers, for example. So most students do not have a sense of achievement. Most students do not have secure self-esteem. So these are life goals, basically. So you can see how hard it gets to the top. And don't even get me started on the top. Secure, like morality. What? Spontaneity, lack of prejudice, acceptance of facts. How the hell do you achieve these? So a massive evaluation, by the way, that you do want to note down is that the higher up you go in Maslow, the more vague it gets, and thus the more difficult it is to know whether you've completed it or not. Right? You would know if you've completed excretion because you could just look down the toilet, but you will not know whether you have completed creativity. What? I drew a picture. Does that mean I've ticked that off? So there's loads of issues with Maslow. I personally love Maslow, by the way. I think it's a brilliant theory. I think it does actually make a lot of sense. And actually, a good evaluation that you might need to know is this is heavily used in counselling, like client-centered therapy. So somebody might come into like my practice, for example, and I'm going to look at them and be like, right, how do we get you to climb this ladder? How do we get you to be more at peace with yourself? How do we get you to be happy with yourself? How do we get you to improve your self-esteem? So one extra thing I would just add to this is I think there is an element of subjectivity here. What happens if you're not close to your family? Right? Family is in two, really. What happens if you're not close to your family and you're okay with not being close to your family? Right? You're at peace with not being. Do you need it? I don't think so. I don't think so. And so there's an element of subjectivity here. Another idea. So I'm going to go on to a completely different idea now, right? Sorry, Rogers, I'm going to put my face over your face. The three selves. So all of you have got three selves. You've got your... I'll go through them, might as well. You've got your self-concept, right? You've got your ideal self, and you have your real self. So I'm going to go back to the self concept, the perceived self. This is also known as the perceived self. This is who you think you are. So if I were to ask you, do you think you are funny? Do you think personally you are a funny person? You will tell me the answer, and that's your that's your perceived self. Okay. Um, uh, I would argue that your perceived self is quite vulnerable to what other people think. So if someone's told you before that you're not very good at maths, like a teacher, your perceived self will be, I'm shit at maths, right? We base our perceived self on kind of what others think about us. And this is quite important for teenagers in particular. You have your ideal self. Now, this is who you want to be. So what I tend to get students to do, and I probably will, or I have done it in your class, is I will get to look at your Instagram photos and show the people around you and show that you are not, that's not what you look like. That is not what you look like in any stretch of the imagination, because that's your ideal self. Basically, a good way to think about social media, everything we put on social media is our ideal self. From the tag at the bottom of the photo to the photo itself to what we're doing in the photo, we're projecting a very, very careful ideal self. Some of you are worse at this than others, admittedly. Some of you don't even have social media. Some of you are very honest in your social medias, and therefore your ideal self will be in a good place. But some of you are completely different, honestly, completely different. And that's a real problem, because the real self is who you actually are. The bigger the gap, and again, important to note, the bigger the gap between your real self and your ideal self, the more vulnerable you will be to severe mental health disorders, namely depression and anxiety severely. Because it's depression as shit to be able to look at your ideal self and think, realistically, I'm nowhere near that. And you're just going to feel like a fraud. That's going to hurt your self-esteem. You're going to feel everyone's better than you. And it's just going to be a cacophony of mental health issues, basically. So to reach self-actualization, you have to have alignment of these three. And alignment is what we are talking about when we talk about congruence. Congruence is basically a an alignment of the three selves. So your real self, your ideal self, and your perceived self are relatively in line with each other. You are who you want to be. If you have that split, if there is a misalignment, that is called incongruence, and it's something you'd want to note down. So as it says here, a healthy sense of well-being is established if there's consistency between your ideal self and your actual behavior. Are you who you want to be? Look at your social medias. Not so much Snapchat. Snapchat's more of a communication tool now, but more Instagram definitely, TikTok definitely as well. So the greater the gap, the greater the incongruence, and incongruence leads to low self-worth and maladjustment, and basically crippling, debilitatingly low self-esteem. Don't really need to know that too much. Oh god, I forgot about this. Sorry, I'll go back to that in a second because that's quite off-putting. I completely forgot what I was going to say now. Yeah, counselling psychologists will use this. Again, they'll look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but then they'll also look at where's your ideal self, where's your real self, and try to close that gap. Now, there's two ways you can do that, and you do need to know these. One way to close the gap is to lower your ideal self, right? Put up pictures on social media that do not put you in the best possible light, for example. This was my basically the same person. This was my profile for 4 years. My student did make me a card with my face on it, which was a bit disturbing. But lower your ideal self, or heighten your real self, make yourself an actual better person. We go further, more ideas involved here as well. So unconditional positive regard in this case, as I have already said, is somebody has loved you for who you are without condition, right? Unconditional positive regard. They love you no matter what. So this can be parents, family members, partners, teachers, therapists, for example. And as I said, I feel as if I have unconditional positive regard for my students. I do see them in a good light, even when they do stupid shit, which they do quite often, and they make bad calls and bad errors. I'd like to think that I do. Whether or not I do, I don't. Now, the opposite to that is conditions of worth. Let me ask you, do any of your parents place conditions of worth on the love and acceptance they give you? So, for example, I don't think any parent would say this outright, but two things. Do you feel your parent would love you um, if you got a grade they weren't happy with? Do you think they would love you less if you got a grade that you were happy with? So parents would never say, "Oh, I would love you if you got a B, but I wouldn't love you if you got a C." But no parent's going to say that. Although some parents are probably quite close to saying that, to be honest. But is it kind of unsaid? Is it kind of like, are they going to put their arm around you at the end and be like, "Look, it didn't work, but no matter what, it's not the end of the world. You're doing fine. I still love you," kind of thing, right? Then again, they're not going to say that. The other thing I want to ask is, do any of your parents place, and again, this is unspoken, are you compared to your older brother or sister if you have one? Do you feel like the love and acceptance and value they give you is kind of based on the concept that you do as well as your older brothers and sisters? Now, I'm not a parent. I don't have like a 16-year-old, 17-year-old kid. I imagine you're right little shits to bring up. I'm actually really difficult. Um, but a lot of my students say that the love they feel, and I'm not criticizing parents here. It must be a really difficult thing to do. But a lot of my students say that they do get the sense of, if they don't do as well as their older brother or sister, they would be like the horrible sheep of the family kind of thing. That's really what you want to avoid. That is them putting a condition on the love they give you, and it can be real or perceived. They can either have literally said it, or you can just think, no, I do think they would do that. It doesn't have to be something they've actually said. So a child who is constantly told by the parents to get good grades may strive to this and feel unloved if they don't get them. Good example to know. And finally, another thing. Now, I love humanistic. Therapy. I think it's really good, and you do kind of need to know the main tenets of it. So, more or less came about in the 90s. Client-centered therapy, the client is encouraged to develop positive self-regard for themselves and to try and match up their incongruence, sometimes through Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So that's where that's used. The client, and this is particularly important, the client-therapist relationship is so important in humanistic counselling, right? You need to make your client feel valued, feel comfortable, feel special. You need to give them unconditional positive regard. You need to see them in a constantly good light. And you will also believe that the client has all of the tools they need to fix themselves. And that is very, very quickly a very quick run through of humanism, right? There's a lot to it. Now, in terms of evaluations, what I have done here a little bit is I have written up 4 very brief evaluations and how you might want to elaborate on them, and hence the bold. Humanistic is very subjective, it's shunned scientific, and therefore it might be more subject to biases like demand characteristics and misinterpretations of what your participant is saying. So if you're doing questionnaires and interviews, that's a huge issue because you're not getting any factual information. It's all subjective. It's more holistic and accepts the multifaceted, complex approach to human behavior. has practical application, so on and so forth. And there is one model point in this case. So I've said the humanistic approach could be argued to have limited practical applications due to how abstract its concepts are. What I mean by that, for those of you who can't wrap your head around abstract, which is quite ironic actually, abstract is something you can't see. It's something you can't touch. It's not tangible, right? It's not touchable. It's not real. You can't see it. So like spontaneity is an abstract concept. Evidence, for example, its assertion that everyone is unique and has free will are difficult to test empirically and physically observe. Then I need to go into the elaboration. This is the important bit. Why is this important? Why is this bit here? Remember, you elaborate on the point. That's so key, by the way. You elaborate on the point. The fact these concepts cannot be observed means they are less useful for tangible benefits for society. And whilst this approach has good ideas, it's quite nice touch there, other approaches like the biological approach offer up more benefits and applications. And as a result, it may be suggested that this approach is less useful for advancing our knowledge of human behavior. That is pretty much humanism in a nutshell. It's a very, very quick run through of what is actually quite a complicated approach. You are likely going to be asked to compare this. I'm not saying it's definitely going to come up, but this is such a weird approach compared to the other four approaches that it's an ideal question for them to get you to identify some differences. So you need to know how humanism is different. Hope this was useful. Peace out.